Hi folks, welcome to today's webinar. My name's Paul Doyle. I'm the General Manager of Rail Freight and Ports with the Australasian Railway Association. Today, I guess we're going to talk about COVID-19 and more importantly, how to get beyond COVID-19. So I think it's fair to say that it's had a massive impact on us all and in particular the rail sector. And I guess my observations over the last few months have been that the resilience that the rail sector has really shown during this time has been phenomenal, and it's been great to see us all stand together and really promote the importance of rail during these difficult times. But we do know from some of the work that we've done where we've surveyed our members that there is an impact to businesses. So Kevin Nuttall from Waterfield, who's a strategy expert, provided a lot of guidance to a number of you who'd be familiar to many of you, is going to talk through, I guess, how we really deal with that and how we, I guess, not only survive COVID-19, but we also thrive during that time. So with that in mind, I'll just run through a few housekeeping items before we actually get into it. So if you click on the little blue hand, it will allow you to ask a question. So by all means, as Kevin's going through the presentation, ask as many questions as you like, and we'll field those at the end of the presentation. There'll be some time for some Q&A. We also have a little button, a light blue button that you can press, which is download resources, so you can get a PDF of the slides. They'll also be sent to you at a later date as well. We're trying something a little bit different this time around as well. We're trying to make it interactive, so there will be a poll that we will ask you at the end of the presentation, which will pick up on some of the themes that Kevin will run through. So if you click on the purple tick button, that will be how you'll be able to answer that poll. There'll also be something that will pop up on your screen that you'll be able to see. And again, if you're looking to adjust your screen position, then you can either click the box that you'll see or the arrows, and that will make the screen larger or smaller. So you can either look at the screen or you can look at the screen at the slides at the same time. So enough of the technical rundown. Let's hand it over to Kevin. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to spend probably 25 minutes getting a bit of a feel for what we're learning as we're working with clients as they're trying to figure out how to get through the crisis and how do they thrive on the other side. So my main intention here is to give you a thinking framework. Like you, everybody else is trying to work out the answers. We're starting to see patterns, and I want to share those with you. This cartoon was in Monday's Australian Financial Review. It really appealed to me, and those of you who are technical will fully understand what this is. It's the Newton Cradle, and what it's showing is the COVID crisis is coming in one end, and of course the ramifications through that whole system continue until it reaches a new equilibrium. So to me, it's just a brilliant model of thinking about what's going to be happening, because you're coming in with one shock and it's going to translate into many shocks and different shocks through the system, and then it'll come back again the other way. So this was sort of crystallized with me with Steve Cartwright, who's the CEO of Business Australia. And I was discussing this with him and saying, this is the pain that the economy is going to have. And he said that you've got to remember that the peak of bankruptcies after the Katrina crisis happened 12 to 24 months later. So in other words, you have the COVID coming in as the start of this impact, but the knock-on effect actually can be quite significant for businesses, and to the point, if they only have a survive agenda, they're probably not going to be able to remain in business in this case, post-COVID. So the research question that we put out to our guys was the following. Why do some businesses, circa 15%, continue to grow both revenue and profit before and after a crisis, and why do many fail? And after working with clients, working through how they were going to cope, what they thought their strategy was to get back to a growth agenda, the answer that came back consistently and worded in this case by BDO in the USA. BDO are a second-tier accounting firm. They have an advisory division. The reason I picked this up is because it came late in the piece, but it is just elegantly put. Business as usual no longer cut it. So it's the businesses that start thinking now about what the post-COVID landscape will look like, and then how to poise to thrive in a crisis and beyond, are the businesses that are going to be successful. So we think, and what I want to do is start to unpack what that looks like. So just a bit of context on Waterfield. Who are we? We're strategy facilitators. We work globally to help companies double their business. So we use strategy as that lever. In the past 3 months, our team has worked with clients US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, China, and India. All of this was in a pre-COVID world. And we're helping those businesses build growth strategies. We are now, like everyone else, forced into this issue around what is it necessary to help our clients hibernate their existing strategy, their growth strategy, and what is the survival strategy need to apply. And so now working with clients, doing extensive research across a couple of teams, working with a scenario planner to try and figure out what post-COVID might present businesses. And we realized that this is actually information that should be shared. So we've taken the unusual step for us to go and actually publicly work with businesses. So our new objective is to help as many businesses as possible to survive and position to thrive in a post-COVID world. That sounds altruistic, and it is at one level, but the other level is that if nobody survives this, then everybody is suffering. So the more businesses that can actually position for success now are the ones that will part of the economy and help the economy grow. So that's our objective, is to get this information out. So a bit of a context. We're faced with the twin crises. We've got a health crisis that we're working on, and then we don't know what the economic crisis flow-on effect will be. Nothing you read at the moment is giving you much comfort about what's going to happen with the global economy and what's going to happen with the national economy. Everybody's hoping for a V, and that is a quick recovery. There are other models out there that basically, it could be a W with a cat's bounce in the middle. It could be a U, like down in an extended period of time before we see recovery. Or it could be an L, which is the economy resets at a lower level permanently, or for an extended period of time, clearly not permanently. The more work we do, we're thinking that a lot of businesses are going to reset in an L shape. And the order of that gap is in the order of 30% reduction in core revenue. And we're starting to see this pattern across businesses. So you've now got to think about, well, where do I make up the 30% of revenue, and where are the growth opportunities beyond to actually grow that revenue top line? So the way we characterized this was, if you look at the phases we're going through, we have a pre-COVID world, we're currently in the COVID crisis, and there will be a post-COVID world. In the business model in the middle there, your pre-COVID business model was probably doing all right. Then you went through the shredder. So everybody, it doesn't matter, even if demand's growing, what we're finding, some clients who've got 10 times demand can't get supply. So up and down the value chain, you've got all of these issues that you need to deal with. So the question then is, what is your post-COVID business model going to be, and what does it look like? If you move to the far right, the psychological states, we were at a relative level of contentment in the pre-COVID world, particularly when you reflect back on where we are now. Everybody has been thrown into confusion. What I'm suggesting to leaders of these organizations, you have to come out of confusion, and you need to start articulating a future state, a desired future state with your team, with your suppliers, with your customers, as soon as possible, and start to get everybody on this journey about what is your post-COVID business model going to look like, and why is it going to be successful, and where is it going? How do you strike strategies in this in context? I don't spend a lot of time on this, but in terms of optimal strategies, top right, no-brainers, are really what you want to do is you want to strike a set of strategies that allow your business to be resilient regardless of how the settings are post-COVID. So some of the dimensions where you're playing with are how much is it hyper-global, hyper-local? How much is going to be the local content, particularly if you look at the manufacturing supply chain? People are concerned that it's too fragile, particularly in a crisis, and too much reliance on China. We had one client who said, no, we're okay, we're sourcing out of Europe. Unbeknownst to them, 3 steps down in their supplier's supply chain was China provided the essential ingredients. So they were equally impacted. So if we go to a local supply, much more, what is your strategy in that environment? If we continue the way we were, which was a globalized market with global just-in-time supply chains, is your strategy still resilient enough to fit in that context? So it's that ability. So the other strategies there, no painters, it only works in one scenario, but it's not detrimental in others. No gainers, bottom left. Strategies that don't work under any scenario. And we're seeing a disproportionate number of businesses who actually have strategies today which will not work in the future. So if you're in the tourism or the travel industry right now, your strategies pre-COVID and today are complete mismatch. The bottom right, big gains, big pains, strategies that have benefit in some scenarios that might be detrimental in others. Our recommendation is, unless you really cash and you can make these enormous bets and you have no threshold, no risk threshold, this is a good place to pay. We don't recommend it. We recommend that you actually look for resilient strategies that are going to allow your business to prosper regardless of where the scenarios land. So some of the thinking that I want to get across is, previously, you could just think about your organization. Now, suddenly, not only your organization, but the demand side, customers, and supply side are all equally impacted by the COVID crisis. So now you've got to think of your business in a value chain, because a bit like the balls on the Newton Cradle, demand side impacts your organization, impacts supply side, and it will ripple back up the system the other way. So you need to be able to start to think about conversations up and down that value chain, and I'll come to that. So the whole premise of our work is you've got to do both. You've got to have survive strategies and to thrive strategies running concurrently in your business. One of the things that in the rush to try and trim the fat in a business, a number of businesses we were cautioning about, you're actually taking away capability today that may in fact be the basis of your ability to thrive in the future. So you can't just go with cost cutting to get rid of things. You've got to start thinking about what are the opportunities we might be missing if we lose that capability today. So the survive strategies, and this is what the poll is about. Where I'm curious to know is, where is your next focus? And a lot of organizations that we're working with have come through this. They actually have strategies for protecting lives and livelihoods. They've done radical financial adaptation. They've actually figured out how to run a break-even budget for 12 months, and they've got high confidence that they can do that. So supply chain continuity. You've got to start looking at where the weakest links are in your supply chain, and what is this? How can you get redundancy, and how can you get cover in those spaces and start those conversations now, rather than waiting for the supply chain to break? The engage and support customers. This is us as a business is where we probably have gained the most value, and that is continuing to keep conversations and engaging and supporting customers has produced probably the most value for our business to date. You bear in mind your customers are an equal amount of pain as you are. So even a conversation is valuable. It's better still, if you can provide support to them, then your chances of them being customers on the other side of the COVID crisis are greatly increased. So if you virtualize the Thrive strategies, there's 4 of these. Virtualize the business. That is the ability for any stakeholder, whether they're a customer, whether they're a supplier, whether they're your staff, to be able to seamlessly and digitally connect with your business. What we're seeing fascinating is a lot of organizations have said we can't go virtual, we can't run the call center, we can't have people operating remotely. And then when there came no choice, a number of our clients did this in 2 days or 4 days. So things that were impossible are now suddenly possible. The collective innovation is, again, looking at the value chain. Start conversations with suppliers, with your own team, and with customers, and even competitors. Actually sit down and have a look at that whole value chain and say, where are we challenged? What are the opportunities? And how can we collectively work together in actually driving new value through that value chain? What we're seeing is there's as many opportunities on the other side of COVID as there are presenting challenges today. So when you sit with that lens and come back, you can actually look at it and go, there's a real opportunity for us to repurpose our assets and capabilities, which is the next Thrive strategy, potentially in combination with suppliers or customers. So you can now get new revenue streams by actually looking at what does the business do today? What do our suppliers do? What are our customers doing? How can we recombine those in a new and novel way? The last one is post-COVID readiness, is starting to do some really conscious work around what are the presenting scenarios. What is it? If these behaviors, if we don't get a vaccine, if we take 2 years to get a vaccine, and there's a question mark whether that's even possible, then what does that world look like? And what are the presenting challenges for our business? And what potentially can be happening in that world? So that is doing scenario planning and extending the narrative into extreme narrative around what each of those dimensions might mean. So if we go on to, I just want to pick up one of these Thrive strategies, which is repurposing assets and capabilities, and give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is a client in the UK. They're called Westgate. On the left-hand side, what they provided was warehousing, industrial warehousing, partitioning separate rooms or fully partitioning whole warehouses, particularly for 3PL organizations. And they got into the supply chain of doing Nightingale hospitals. I think there were 18 of them around the UK. The biggest one was in London, 3,000-bed hospital. So their capability, they just repurposed it into building hospitals, building the temporary hospitals. And the collaboration that came across that, both with the people manufacturing the beds and so on, all the oxygen supplies, everything associated with that, they came up with a series of collaborations to be able to build temporary hospitals. That gave them a massive peak in revenue, obviously, during the crisis. Those hospitals are now being shut down. But this is the key point. If you look at the top right there, they now do social distancing solutions for offices and workplaces. So previously, their whole mindset was, we're industrial. We do fit outs for industry or for hoardings for construction work. They repurposed into medical, and now they've repurposed into manufacturing for workplaces and offices. So they end up with a legacy, a post-COVID opportunity, which is probably as big as their warehousing business. So I'll give you a couple of other examples. In China, there are some companies that are having immense demand, such as Chinese e-commerce sector is growing rapidly. There are other businesses that are slow to take up. And so what they've done is they've kept, the business on the left has kept the employee on their books, and they essentially rent them out to the businesses who have these peak demands coming through. So you're still innovating. Your asset is your people, and you don't want to lose them because your demand will pick up over time. How can we keep them on the books? How can we allocate them differently? And that's what they came up with. And the last, just a very simple example of an innovation that actually appealed to me. This is a snorkeling mask for, obviously for diving. And they buy a $3 3D printed adapter, which they published publicly. You could now suddenly make that a ventilator. So with basically, this would be a dive company going, well, we're in diving, and I suspect the diving industry at the moment is probably depressed like everybody else. However, they were able to repurpose into the medical emergency. So what happens when you figure out what your response is for the survive and thrive? You capture it on a strategy map, and the strategy map looks like this. So down the right-hand side, under 2023, you articulate your end state. You go out 3 years, and you're going post-COVID. Our aspiration is to have a business with these capabilities in markets. Start for you as what this will look like on the other side. All the way from the profile you have in those markets, all the way to the bottom one, which is performance. And that is, what level of revenue, what level of EBIT, what level of performance do we expect from this business? At the moment, what we've got is organizations. So the top strategic investments that organizations are making, which are in blue, are about ability to survive, which allows the business to progress. The bottom ones, which are in the light pinky color, are the key strategies for thriving, virtualizing the business, collective innovation, repurposing assets, and post-COVID readiness. These are all the critical ones for post-COVID. So once you have a strategy, you know where you're going in 3 years' time, you know what your survive strategy is, and you have a set of milestones that you're kicking off. The execution cycle we're recommending is 222, and that comes from the following. Strategy development is normally done on an annual cycle. We're saying you should be setting, if you're facing significant disruption, you should have a 2-monthly strategy. Agile sprints, 90 days becomes 2 weeks. Stand-ups, 2 weeks becomes 2 days. So we're saying 222, 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days is the cadence we suggest you put in the business to be able to adapt it rapidly. The execution cycle and response team is, once you have the survive thrive strategy, you need to resource it with the response team, which is the 222 response team. You need to put it up and make it visible. We talk about radical transparency. You want everybody who's involved in helping change the business to be fit for purpose post-COVID, have absolute visibility of what's going on. You then put it in on the left-hand side, the 222 cadence. Those learnings come into the map. The map evolves over time. So we in our business, we're basically eating our own dog food, as we call it, and actually sitting inside this structure. And we are discovering that some of our hypotheses are not correct. We're having to adapt those and move on. And that adaptation speed is what the critical deliverable is through the cadence, through the 222. So just to flesh that out a bit more, if you look at strategy development, normal strategy execution development would be every year. We're saying under 222 is every 2 months. Agile sprints, which is normally every quarter or 90 days, is every 2 weeks. And stand-ups, which are these 20-minute coordination synchronization meetings, basically every 2 weeks is what we normally run. We're now running them for a lot of clients on every 2 days. What the interesting feedback on this is that clients are finding this, the collaboration that they're getting and the connection that they're getting from speeding up the process is actually working for teamwork. It's helping that team work far more effectively together. So conclusions are that you can't just survive. You can't just look at the business and have a sense that whatever the normal will not necessarily be the same. And therefore, you've got to start thinking about what the Thrive strategies look like on the other side. The second, number two, you set up a 222 response team that can make binding decisions quickly. And we can explore exactly who's on that team and how that works later. And the third part on this puzzle is acting fast and learning fast. So there's no time in a what did Churchill say? You should never waste a good crisis. The pace at which this is moving, you have to match it with your pace internally. So the internal pace has to match the external pace of change. Just a parting thought on this, you cannot predict the future, but you can anticipate it and you can take action now. So nobody knows exactly how this is going to play out. Particularly in Australia, we're starting to get a sense of what this might look like in Australasia. It's anyone's guess how this is going to play out globally. And but you can anticipate what some of those changes might be and where they might fit in your part of your whatever business you're in. Where does that fit today and what are the likely impacts on that? And then you can test that by taking action. So the last slide, and this will be in the pack, and I believe Paul will go to everyone. That is, there's a couple of articles that we've written. One is Survive and Thrive Strategy for Business, which talks to this concept. And we've written a more detailed article on applying the 222 response to your business. So, Paul, I'm open to questions now as to what people want to talk about, but that is just setting up the framework that we've been working with clients on.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Kevin. What we might do is we might get Red back to pop up the poll, and we'll answer a couple of questions, but we'll give people some time with the poll to answer. Really, I guess what we're asking in that poll is, of those survive and thrive mechanisms, which ones are really of importance to people, and we'll circle back at the end to have a bit of a conversation about those. But if I just go through some of the questions here, Kevin, Sam has said, I like the idea of employee sharing being adopted in China. If over 100 billion is being invested in rail infrastructure, how can the rail industry implement similar models? Many companies don't like these models as they are concerned they will lose their employees to competitors. You got any thoughts on that?
Yes, to us the choice is you lose talent. You potentially will lose talent, but if you help them actually grow into another role, it still sits inside the industry, and the chances are they will remain loyal to you. If you've looked after them, they will remain loyal to you. I'll give you an example of this. Animal Logic, who did Happy Feet, built out at Fox Studio, built this amazing team who built the movie. They did not know whether that movie would have a sequel. So what they did when the movie wound up and was about to go, they actually helped all of those animators find other roles in other companies all around the world, but kept in contact with them. And then when Happy Feet was successful and the sequel was released, they went out to that same cohort of people that employed them and asked them back. And a disproportionate number of them came back to do the sequel. To me, that is just a brilliant strategy. In other words, we know it right now, we're constrained, but we'll look after you, employees and team, and we'll help you work in the industry. So that capability remains there. My suggestion to you is that when you are ready and you ask for them to come back, they will highly likely return to your business. And we've seen examples of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, Kevin. Next question from Ralph. Like all disruptions, there will be unintended outcomes. Organisations will be willing to allow workers to work from home, for example. Travelling behaviours will need to change. Office layouts will change. Mass gatherings may change forever and impact a range of activities. how do you provide insight for an organisation to work in this new type of environment?
The scenario planner we've been collaborating with has a model which basically works on two axes. So it's essentially you have a crossbar. You have one axis horizontal, one axis vertical. And what you're doing on the premise, you cannot predict the future. I don't think anybody sat there and predicted the coronavirus. And very few people predicted global financial crisis. But it's not outside the realms of plausibility that both of those things could have happened. So in a scenario with an effective scenario planning process, you're not excluding possibilities, extreme possibilities. So if you go, for example, when we started to explore this with some of our clients around what are the scenarios they're expecting post-COVID. And when we looked at them, we found that they were more wishful thinking than actually helping them think. So when an organization sits down with a mindset, there's two biases. One is called the normalcy bias, and that is everything will go back to normal. And the other one is confirmation bias, which we're all subject to both of those. Scenario planning should push you outside of those limits and make you uncomfortable. So what if people en masse go to cars? Now, there's completely uncomfortable conversation to have. What if fulfillment is done differently and freight rail is not seen as an essential part of that supply chain? These are extremely uncomfortable scenarios, but are they plausible? The answer is they potentially are. So therefore, how is your business in all of those extremes? So what we're trying to do is get businesses you can't answer the question, what will the future look like? That's just not available to us as humans. However, you can start to push the envelope in multiple directions of plausibility. And then you can start to go, okay, if our business model is X, is it still going to be resilient in all of those potential scenarios? And if it isn't, then you need to look at your business opportunity. You need to look at your business and its model and its strategies. I don't know whether that answered your question, Paul.
Oh, look, I think it does, Kevin. And I think that's exactly, when you have that level of uncertainty, scenario planning, I guess, gives you a way to sort of look at what the possibilities might be. And I guess in doing that, you can look at the likelihood. You'll have a sense of how likely some of these scenarios might be and your level of confidence that you might have around them as well. And in the absence of, being able to magic what the answer will be, I think that's really good advice in terms of how you might, try and get a handle on what realistically could happen. But as you've said with some of your other material, you also need to be fairly adaptive and flexible and move quickly because things do change as well.
Just on that comment of when we looked at the scenarios coming back that he was proposing, our natural bias was towards the ones where everybody was collaborating and everybody was happy, and we had an adverse reaction to the fact that Trump and China and populist leaders will take the pandemic and make it worse and turn it into a Cold War. And our biases were, no, we're going to build a vaccine together and we're going to be happy campers. And you're going, well, hang on a minute. That's just confirmation bias. That's just a way that we like to think the world will operate. The world potentially could operate in a far more ugly way than we've seen for a very long time, post-COVID. So if Trump gets back in, the world order may in fact change quite dramatically. So I just found it interesting. I didn't even want to entertain that this could the pandemic could be the catalyst for even more disruption in the future. That wasn't even in my thinking. And what it's done is going, well, am I as a business able and capable to add value to other businesses in that changing environment.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just wondering, Kevin, perhaps put a bit of context around some of these concepts. I'm just wondering, maybe what would be valuable, I guess, when I first met you when I started in this role earlier in the year, I guess how you were going about what you were doing is very different to how you're doing it now. I just wonder, with some of those sort of survive and thrive concepts in mind, if you can just talk a little bit about how it applies to your own business, because I think it's certainly something that you've obviously reflected on in refining where your service offering sort of goes these days.
I'm being naughty and I'm going backwards. We have obviously there are two or three critical resources in our business. We made sure that none of us connected, none of our vectors connected. So if anyone got sick, we didn't all get sick. We've all worked from home. So these are pretty much the standard things that most businesses have been doing. Radical financial adaptation. We did a massive change to how the business operates and got a break-even budget, and which is a worst-case budget. And even when the incentives was dropped and things like that, we excluded those because we thought that they potentially could change as well on a dime. They came in unexpectedly, they could leave unexpectedly. So we didn't count them in our financial break-even. Supply chain continuity, we made sure that, part of making sure that key resources did not end up in the same space at the same time was part of making sure that we could continue to value to clients. We checked across all of our supply chain in terms of our software and our associates and made sure that they were still positioned to continue to work with us. Engage and support customers. I think I mentioned to you, this is the area that we've had the most value in our business. And what I was amusing in the fact that normally CEOs are really hard to get to. We're generally making phone calls and getting CEOs who are not only preparing to take a call, but also to have a chat because they're at home, a lot of them. So it's actually, and half the time we can't add any value, but they've welcomed the conversation, they've welcomed the connection. A lot of times they're saying, we're looking for somebody who can do X. And generally in our network, we have an extensive network, we can find out who to connect them with. So we've done a lot of connecting and supporting customers. Digital capability or the virtualization of the business. We've moved significantly. The execution side of our business globally always ran through video conferencing and an online platform. We've never done the initial kickoff workshops in the same way. We're now capable of doing that. The first one I designed, I described as a horseless carriage because I designed the workshop as if it was a physical workshop. It didn't work very well, didn't use the technology very well. We have ramped up significantly in that ability. Collective innovation. We are working far more extensively up and down our value chain, innovating with clients, innovating with suppliers. Repurposing assets and capabilities. What you're looking at here is a repurposing of our strategy that is focused on delivering something for us to survive and thrive. Everything is modeled as a true model that we've repurposed into this mechanism. Post-COVID readiness. One of the collaborations that we've done, as I mentioned, is with the scenario planner, trying to get a far better understanding of what are these extreme scenarios that might plausibly play out, and then testing our strategy against those. Can we continue to operate if that is true? So, for example, where does our server sit? And if that country is compromised, are we compromised? So it just forces you to start looking. If you run your business through all those lenses, you can then figure out, clearly surviving is a necessary prerequisite. But are you doing enough around figuring out post-COVID and what is the Thrive strategy on the other side? That was a long-winded answer, but I don't know whether that puts you in the right direction.
No, it definitely wasn't long-winded, and I think definitely is valuable because it gives people a practical example. I was just conscious, without trying to put you on the spot, that I know that you've obviously don't just tell others to apply that framework. You've thought about it and how it applies to your business, and that just gives people a bit of context and guidance. Just picking up on the theme around collective innovation and collaboration, we got a question here from Dimitri where he said, where should not-for-profits be focusing their attention at the moment to support members to adopt to a post-COVID world? I guess my observation in the sort of member services space is that everyone's trying to be very active and very much trying to support their members, but a number of different sectors are facing similar sorts of challenges. And are there opportunities, I guess, to pick up that sort of collaboration theme and work across different sectors to get outcomes that benefit the entire supply chain in which we operate. I'm just interested in your thoughts about how it applies to not-for-profits and I guess the sort of work that we're involved in.
I don't see any difference in my head between a not-for-profit and a for-profit organisation, and that both of them, you have a beneficiary of profit, talking charity, for example. However, somebody's got to pay for it. And in a commercial organisation, it's clearly the customer that's paying for it. So if you don't, the main thing we're seeing that we want to caution companies against is putting the old lens against what is potentially a new normal. If your starting premise is we're just going to force fit our organisation and its business model into what the post-COVID world might present, I'm suggesting to you that is probably not going to help you. So if you're sitting there and going, well, we used to have this strategy as a not-for-profit, and we're just going to do more of it, and we're just going to do it harder, I think you just end up being annoying to those organisations and saying it is not relevant to us.
Yeah.
Where we are and what we're doing. So the thing you need to find out is what is relevant to those organisations and what capabilities do we have that can actually be repurposed to those. So if you take our business, we do long-term strategy and we help organisations get there to double their business in 2 to 3 years. This is a 2-month horizon. So us going and talking to clients around, okay, what is let's do a long-term strategy, 3 to 5 years. This isn't going to resonate with anyone. Right now, this is the priority. So the not-for-profit that's sitting there going, we'll do more of what we've always done but harder, is probably going to end up reducing its relationship with its members or its customers or its beneficiaries.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think we've seen that a lot of examples in COVID-19 where if your email chains are anything like mine or your LinkedIn, I think a lot of people are trying to be active and trying to be responsive and trying to do a lot of stuff. But there's an opportunity, I guess, in times like this to sort of step back and just have a think about, well, is this adding value right now? And it's hard because everyone's trying to rally together and help each other under what are some fairly extraordinary circumstances. Next question. So I guess what I'll do is if anyone hasn't completed the poll already, we're at 1:15. We might give them another 5 minutes, though, Kevin, and then we'll get Red back to bring the results up, and we'll have a bit of a chat about what that's telling us at the end of it. But we've probably got time for a few more questions. This is a good question. Why have you placed the emphasis on thriving? Isn't surviving the first priority?
The natural inclination is you've got to survive. But I think I mentioned to you, Steve Cartwright, the CEO of Business Australia, that Katrina example really it just struck me as being surviving is not enough. And the number of organisations that go into bankruptcy sometime later after the crisis abates is a repeating pattern. So we went back and had a look at bankruptcies and the incidents, and the range was anything from 12 to 3 years when the peaks happen. And our hypothesis is that if your focus is just to get through, just to get to the other side, then it's what we call event-based planning. You basically have a strategy up until a point in time, and then you stop. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Sydney Olympics, absolutely outstanding work hosting those Olympics and having all the facilities, and incredible involvement of everybody in that endeavour. Great set of Olympics. The Olympics finished, and I think New South Wales went into a slump for about 3 years economically. And because to me there was no other side of that. So how do we capitalise on this infrastructure, this newfound positioning in people's minds that Australia is not that far away as a tourist destination, etc., etc. I saw very little of that happening. The other one that in terms of event-based planning, we think this is a major issue for a lot of organisations. We've just got to get to the other side of something. That is not sufficient. It's beyond that. And the other case is mission accomplished, which was Bush, and in Afghanistan taking 20 years to get out of the place. So I think the reason we're emphasising this is it is not an event. Post-COVID will end, but there is a significant world beyond that, and you've got to plan for that. What could that potentially look like?
Yep, great advice. We're still waiting for the poll, so we might just run through another question here, which I think is an interesting one.
Yep.
So Gary has asked, lots of businesses have strategic plans and strategic planning days. When we get back to the office, it's business as usual. In your experience, how do you improve the take-up of the adoption of the strategic plans into day-to-day business?
This is in terms of our history as a firm. Very quickly on, we decided that putting strategic plans in bottom drawers made no sense at all. So, how do you embed strategy execution as a discipline in the business? And the area that's done it most well, the sector that's done it most well, is the software sector with agile development, agile execution. We're seeing a lot more businesses adopting that approach. And 222 is an agile execution model. You have a strategy for, in this case, 2 months. You're basically working in a sprint for 2 weeks, and you're doing daily synchronization stand-ups on every 2 days. So it's building the cadence and the discipline in the business and keeping it visible, keeping strategy visible at all times is one of the critical underpinnings, and then building a discipline and embedding a discipline in the business. So when we look at organizations and going, okay, give me an operational competency that you have. Well, it might be, they're great on the work in progress, they're great on some other aspect of the business, the ability to manage their supply chain. When you ask them how long did it take to build that competency, the operating competency in the business, it sometimes is 12 months, 2 years before it became the DNA of the business. The only way you're going to build strategy execution as a competency is you actually have to start and then build the capability in the business, practice it, and continue until it embeds as a way of thinking and embeds as a way of doing it. And that's where, as a business, that's where we've invested a disproportionate amount of time and energy and effort. I often joke that I'd be younger, better looking and richer if I'd never gone there. But it's the critical piece that needs to be solved. And in the COVID crisis, it's that pace of adaptation, that speed, that's the critical deliverable.
Yeah, and hence advice around the triple two approach as well, I guess, to keep that cadence and rhythm going within an organisation. So we've got some poll results, Kevin, which I'll just run through with you. So of the 8, I might just give you the top 3. So coming in at number 1 is engage and support customers, which had about 29% as it currently stands. Protect lives and livelihoods is at 19%. And then post-COVID readiness is also at 19%. So they're the top 3. Supply chain continuity comes in at number 4 with 12.5%.
That's really interesting.
What's your initial gut feel based on those? Is it what you expected?
Yeah, we've done a number of polls with clients and other groups, and number 1 has been engage and support customers.
Yeah.
So we had one organisation who was attending something saying, we've been in hibernation. How do we know if our customers are going to come back? And I'm sitting there going, why haven't you been talking to your customers? Why haven't you been engaging with your customers? Why haven't you been, and so just to sit there and go, I'm just going to sit and wait till the world resets to normal is, again, a fallacy. I think it's going to be the illusion that a lot of these companies will have. So some of the data out of the US, after disasters, whether it's a hurricane or whether it's a global 40% of them don't open. That's horrific. And then a further 25% of those fail within the next 12 months, and a disproportionate within 2 years. So if you haven't kept conversations with your customers and telling them what's going on and why it's safe to come back and work with you, what the future's going to look like for them, now you've absolutely got to get started on that journey now. Can I give you one brilliant example I saw was a tour company that took people on walking tours and showed them the location and the history, etc. They stayed connected to their customers by putting a GoPro on the head of the tour guide and sold places for that person to go on the tour. They book a place, they go on a virtual tour with a real guide and the GoPro. If you paid a little bit more, the guide, you could control the guide, what he did and where he looked and what part of the history or what part of the environment that you wanted them to explain more. So for a 10-minute window, you bought exclusive access to the tour guide. So that was, to me, was just a brilliant example of staying connected to customers. So we'd expect that to be number 1. Protect lives and livelihood. I think this is where the ARA has really got is an extreme value add. Collect the best practice, collect the research, collect the information, collect the expectations of your customers and your passengers and so on, and try and figure out what is best practice in this space. We're working in the built environment with office space, and we're seeing organisations coming up with pretty novel ways to keep the office space safe. Post-COVID readiness, we recognise that as a critical component, and actually doing the research and actually starting to build potential scenarios we see as a critical part of this process of being ready for that future. To sit there and go, I'm going to write a scenario that is based on my preferences isn't going to help you. And then if you build this complex set of dimensions, these narratives, and some of them are deeply uncomfortable, and you're going, are we resilient as a business in all 4 or 5 dimensions? And if you're not, you've actually got to question whether your strategy is going to help you or not. Yeah, that's good. That's good feedback.
Yeah, okay. And look, I think it probably gives us some food for thought, because each of these 8, can potentially be another presentation in themselves, and we can do a bit of a deep dive on some of those themes. I quite like the idea of a GoPro trek. That sounds like a lazy man's idea of a good holiday. I'd quite welcome that myself. But yeah, it's just a great example of where people are, being innovative and just really repurposing, how they actually engage and support people as well.
Just an example, just a quick example. That GoPro, you could extend that to going. What's passenger rail going to look like for you as a commuter?
Yeah.
And have somebody actually go, this is what's happening. This is how we're keeping it clean. This is where you're going to sit. This is what the schedule is going to look like. This is how we're making this, and so on and so forth. You take people through the journey, and allay their fears, and get them to understand that it's going to work. We can keep you safe.
Yeah, and it's actually you're dead right. It's definitely got some value in the passenger space, and I know that the freight guys have also been looking at some of this as well as a way to deal with the social distancing. So if they've got requirements to have people supervising, or a certain number of people actually in the trains themselves, then they can use this technology to say, well, look, we're still tracking and monitoring things, but we don't actually have that close interaction. So there's lots of different ways that can be used. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up, Kevin?
Well, I think it's important to you've got to think about post-COVID as a potentially a whole new normal and a new set of settings. And then the second one is you need to adapt your business at the speed of change that is external. And at this stage, our sense and reading is we're working 6 to 7 times faster. The world is changing rapidly, and trends that were apparent pre-COVID are now suddenly ramping up to an astonishing extent. If you look at Zoom, you look at home working, you look at flexible working, you look at the way we use office space, etc. Those trends will accelerate dramatically. And one of the things really stuck in my mind was the Minister for Health saying, with telemedicine, we did in 10 days, which would have taken us 10 years. So I'm saying you've got to start thinking about post-COVID now. You've got to start experimenting now, and you've got to operate at an extremely high cadence in order to adapt fast enough to be able to survive and thrive on the other side.
Thank you, Kevin. I enjoyed that, mate. That was really refreshing. So thank you again to Kevin, and thank you to everyone who dialed in today. I guess the next steps are that this material will be made available to everyone who's registered. So I encourage you to have a look at that. And if you have any questions, get in contact with either Kevin or the ARA. And this Friday, I think we've got my colleague Nat will be talking to Virginia Housiger on gender equality. So we look forward to that one on Friday. But for now, thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.